Alright guys, TacticalRab back again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far with Rostermania questions continuing. Clayster has given his point of view on exactly his chances of getting a spot back into the league for next season. Was on the Ravens this past year. That did not continue though, even going into the Esports World Cup back in ReeaL a few weeks ago. Clay's been trying to come back for Black Ops 6, but as it stands, that seems rather unlikely. Only a few teams remain as actually realistic possibilities here, and Clayster has seemingly not got an offer from any of them quite as of yet. What's his future if he doesn't get something through the postbox anytime soon? Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. A few quick interesting things on Black Ops 6 here, especially when it comes down to weapon balancing and the SWAT. So if you guys ever played Black Ops 2 back in the day, you might remember the SWAT 556, a 3-round burst weapon, which is effectively what we have now back here in Black Ops 6. This is Simp with it in hand, and it's pretty good. If you guys have used it in the beta so far, you'll know that if you hit your burst, this gun absolutely incinerates. Now, is it balanced? Well, I would say probably yes, compared to the fact that there are other stronger guns in the game and the burst delay is pretty sizable. But in the hands of a pro player, could it be viable and competitive? The answer is probably yes as well. Now, there's a big question on this, because for the last several years, we've not had a burst weapon in the competitive meta. It's been so long, honestly, since we've even really had one. Has it not even been since the jetpack era, really? We're talking when the M8 was around in Black Ops 3. Ever since then, Infinite Warfare, there wasn't a burst gun. I mean, World War II, there was briefly the HyDra, right? But that was G8 immediately. That was a 4-round burst weapon that came in. And since the CDL, none of the weapon metas have included a burst gun as far as I can remember. So there's been talk about this, because my feeling is, among the feeling of many others, that the metas tend to be better when there's a burst gun that's viable. My concern about this is that it's a 3-round burst. And I feel like the 3-round burst guns, historically, tend to be quite overpowered if they are balanced in a way which is, you know, appropriate for competitive. Just because you have to be able to kill in 3 bullets in order to make the one burst work effectively, and that tends to be maybe why the 4-round bursts, like the M8s, were kind of considered a bit more balanced maybe. Like they had to kill in 4 bullets with a 4-round burst, but they had a shorter burst delay, so you didn't feel like you were getting completely incinerated. But to be fair, you still would. If you got one bursted by an M8, you were still getting deleted off the map. Even back in Black Ops 3, there was the XR2, right, which was the 3-round burst alternative. Not as good as the M8, but definitely a gun that they could model the SWAT off, because if the M8 was banned in Ban and Protect, that's the gun that would come through. But this was the interesting discussion, right? So Matt Sconce from Treyarch in the reply says, I challenged the team to get a burst fire gun back into the competitive meta. How far off are we? And Crim says, you know, the gun feels very slow. Movement, ADS, sprint to fire, but obviously it can easily one burst and very quickly. Difficult to land a one burst when people are on headies at distance. My advice would be to adjust that somehow. That's truthfully why full auto has been used more in comp compared to the burst weapons, because it's more consistent, right? So, like, this is the thing. The pros will say, oh, well, the burst guns are overpowered because you die in, like, you know, immediately, right? Which is true, but also they are a little bit more inconsistent. I think in an ideal world, you'd have a situation where your main AR would probably run the burst weapon, and then, you know, which would have very low recoil and would kill immediately, but would be kind of sluggish as a gun. And then your flex player or whatever would use a faster AR, like a full auto, something like the auto or whatever it was called back in Vanguard, right? Some gun like that, and then a burst would be kind of the main AR. I don't know. It's interesting to see, but I think fair play for Treyarch trying. I don't think they're going to be successful just based on history, but they're going to try and make a burst gun viable and competitive. And it's interesting that he says get a burst fire rather than get the SWAT, which maybe implies that there might be a 4-round burst gun coming when the full game launches. And if that's true, then hopefully that actually does arrive back into the meta and doesn't get G8 or something. There was some discussion as well about, you know, tactical sprint. I think that's kind of one of the reasons why COD doesn't feel the same to me as it used to, really, is ever since Warzone came around and tactical sprint being a thing. And maybe there's something they can do about that, but probably nothing's going to change on that front, to be fair. This was pretty cool as well, not going to lie. Relatively rare you see Dashy pull out an SMG, it's got to be said. But, you know, just to share some of the highlights from this particular moment here with Dashy on Skyline, which, let's be honest, is probably the only map that seems seems especially viable. I think we saw this clip yesterday, but it's a pretty rare Dashy POV on the SMG, and it's got to be said, if there's more maps like Skyline in the full launch, fine. If there isn't, then I think we could be in for a bit of a rough time, it's got to be said, if we get more like Scud and some of these other ones. But they did say, Treyarch, at least in the COD next day, that the maps that they're bringing in the full launch, at least there will be more kind of remastered old school maps. Like, I think there was at least hinting that some maps such as Raid and others probably would be making a return in the full release. There's also been rumours, of course, about Hacienda. I think it's definitely plausible that we get to, let's say, you know, 5 maps in competitive that are actually good, but I think in an ideal world you'd like to have 6 or 7. I mean, I don't mean to mention Black Ops 3 again, but I just have to. Back in Black Ops 3, in Search and Destroy, at the start of the game, there were 7 maps that were played in Search and Destroy. It, of course, was the ones that eventually became the 5 proper competitive rotation maps that people played in GBs and stuff. So we're talking Fringe, Breach, Stronghold, Infection, and Redwood. And in addition to those two, you had Evac and Hunted that were other Search and Destroy maps also played. All of those maps were good S&D maps, to be honest. And there were 7. Maybe you could even have come up with another one as well. Getting to 7 viable competitive maps for one game mode nowadays just seems like an impossible task. The only way that it's even possible is by remastering old maps, it seems like. So I don't hate that idea, but I do hope that we can have some other things going on. But let's talk about some of the Rostermania stuff. Scrap is still the big question mark of the moment. What is happening with Toronto? What is happening with Cloud9? The reality is we don't really know the answers to those questions, right? And when we get clarification, that's going to be a lot of dominoes falling, right? If you are one of these bottom tier teams that Clayster is obviously thinking about whether he's going to get an offer from or not, you got to wonder whether, all right, Toronto have to figure out what's going on there. Cloud9 have to figure out what's going on there. And after that, then obviously there's going to be some degree of trickle down, and then the other teams are going to figure out what they're going to be doing. But until then, you got to wonder, right? If you're Thieves, you might not make a change, but you might if the door opens, right? And apparently they've had conversations with Envoy over the last few days. So this is what Clayster has to say on the situation. Of course, he's been playing the beta and reveals that as it stands, it's looking pretty slow to get back into the CDL. He did a solid job on Ravens this past year, was arguably the better of their 2 ARs between himself and Fellow, certainly after they made the change with Fellow after they dropped GodRx just a few matches into the season. And, you know, in the end, they didn't make it to the World Championship. They weren't quite good enough when it matters. And, you know, the reality is their online performances probably at the start of the season were the real factor that cost them towards the end of the year in terms of getting enough points to actually qualify for the big one. And after the World Championship, where he got dropped for beans going into the World Cup. Clay, though, still veteran player. I still think he can be a solid value add to a team. The issue is, where does he go, right? What opportunities are on the table? And as it stands, it doesn't seem like there's many, if any, at all.
Well, I got 0 offers, though, so it looks like I'm not playing, bro.
Nah.
No way.
A lot of time left. A lot of time left.
There's a lot of time. You gotta see how it shakes out.
There's only 4 potential spots, dude.
You gotta see how it
That's a
shakes
lot.
out, man. Feel spin right now.
4? Okay, so you gotta think about it this way, right? Top 4 ain't picking me up, right? So that's 4 off the board, right? Then you got LA Thieves, who's not making a change because they just got 2nd and they got a young roster.
Oh, they're not making a change?
Right, so that's 5. Then you got Heretics, all Spanish, 6. You got
we're late on the intel.
You got Falcons, that's 7. So then you got 5 left or 4 left, right? Because LAG isn't a fucking org anymore, right?
What's on my gun?
So you got 4 left. You got Carolina, you got Boston, you got Rocker, and you got Surge. Fuck your gun, dude. So there's those 4, right? I just got kicked off Carolina, so that's not an option. There's
maybe they changed their mind and pick you back up.
There's only 3 other options.
Before, Jim.
So it's always been a tricky spot for main AR players to get a spot in the league just because there's so many main ARs and there's only so many opportunities that can realistically be going around. This season is going to be kind of crunch time for guys like certainly Clayster, but also accuracy as well, whether, you know, he gets a spot or not. The good news is for players like that, they have alternatives, right? They don't necessarily need to play. They may want to play. Clay certainly wants to play. I don't know what accuracy thinks. It's possible that accuracy wants to coach and now he's decided that's his direction, and some very good team, I'm sure, will give Accuracy a coaching opportunity, as well they should, in my opinion. But many of these other main ARs, even, Attach, for example, where's he going to end up? These are the 12 CDL teams, and things are changing because Legion are no longer a thing. They are now the Vegas Falcons, right? So that team is completely off the radar. And there are still other teams that are yet to be determined. As Clay says, Surge are an interesting one because they've got rid of aBeZy, they've got rid of Hook. So, the opportunity for like a Clay aBeZy duo is not impossible, but also aBeZy tends to be at his best, it seems, on, the main AR role. He's still a pretty fast player. Like, I do think a Clay aBeZy duo could actually work. They both play aggressively. So, it could be a viable combo. I just don't know if that's something that they necessarily want to do, but maybe Rambo thinks about it, of course, as the coach and kind of GM over there, bringing Clay back into the fold. Of course, they won a world championship together back in 2020 when they were on the Dallas Empire. But, we talk about Accuracy. Of course, Miami, Spanish team, they're not going to do anything. FaZe, OpTic, Toronto, Cloud9, Los Angeles Thieves, realistically, those teams aren't going to be going for Clay. So it does narrow down the options somewhat. So that's the thing for Clayster, right? He's not seemingly got anything from the Ravens yet or from Boston, and you wouldn't necessarily expect it because Ravens, who knows what's happening with that franchise? They usually leave things until last minute anyway. They've got rid of Tej, they're trying to get rid of Fellow. Of course, Beans was let go completely right after the World Cup. Boston, again, who knows what's happening there? G2, they seemingly have some idea what they're planning to do, but, maybe that's a possibility over at the Minnesota Rocker. And again, with Gorillas, they might be getting straight bought outright, and that was a rumor a couple of weeks ago now, on the 21st of August, that Fnatic and Gen G looking to get involved to potentially buy the Ravens and the Gorillas respectively. So just because Clay doesn't have any offers yet coming through doesn't necessarily mean they won't exist. I think largely what's happening right now is that these teams just are figuring out what's happening behind the scenes. The top teams will decide what changes they're going to make. Toronto, Cloud9, stuff like this. Maybe OpTic and FaZe get involved if Scrappy's available, whatever. We talked about that over the last few days. But after that, you've then got the Thieves, who might potentially pick up the pieces. And then the other organizations, certainly Vegas know what they're doing, right? The Falcons, Miami know what they're doing, at least in terms of they're going to have a Spanish team. There's not so many other teams, and those that are remaining, they might be getting sold. I mean, Gen G might be getting in, Fnatic might be getting in, but this is the thing with Clayster, right? Last off-season he said he doesn't want to have to go through the ringer again of Rostermania, right? He wants to just either get re-signed or just get signed very easily. I don't think that's going to happen, but I don't think that's going to happen for many players in Clay's position that I don't imagine have been approached yet. I would be surprised if Clay doesn't get approached by anyone at some point, but it may only happen once some of these franchise discussions have actually been resolved, and that may be quite a way down the line. And, of course, that raises the question for, let's say, the likes of Clayster, and obviously there's, guys like Illy on the market as well, potentially, so there's lots of competition out there for many of these AR spots in the league. Maybe Clay and Illy could team up again, who knows, somewhere. But that's probably not going to be happening quite yet. And that's why it's interesting for Clay, because we would be pretty sure that an opportunity on the desk would be there for Clay should he want it, right? He's done a great job on the desk when he was there at the end of last season, at the end of this season as well, at Champs and at the World Cup. Like, I imagine that the CDL would say, yeah, Clay, if you want to be on our desk full time and have, that as the quartet, I guess, of Puckett, Nameless, Alicata, and of course Clay, that would be a pretty good quartet, and that's one they might well go for. And I think that opportunity there for Clay is probably there, and it honestly makes quite a lot of sense. But Clay still wants to compete, and the league might be like, well, got to give us an answer, like, are we going to do this or not? While Clay's still sitting there kind of waiting to see whether anyone's going to, reply to him after their franchise situation is done. So it's a little bit interesting, really. Wishing the best for Clay, whatever he does. I'm sure whatever he does is going to be fine. I do hope that he gets to compete again, but he just didn't have a great season overall, and this actually was what the Reddit put together as their top 30 players of the season. And you can maybe say there's a little bit of OpTic bias here with Shotzzy being second. I don't think I have him second personally. I think he's number 4 behind HyDra and Scrap, but it's all very close. I mean, there's no doubt that between those 4 guys, you can probably vote any which way for who was the best player of the year. Simp wins it. Dashy, Cellium, Drazah, aBeZy, Ghosty is your top 10. Then you've got, 11 to 20. And then in, the top 30 range, you've got players like ReeaL and Lins and Beans and Estriel and Nastie and even, TJ Hallier's here as well. But obviously, Clayster not on this list, right? So it's understandable why many people would say Clay's washed up, it's time to go. But I think he can still add value to a team, but I can understand why it's maybe looking a little bit slow at the moment. But very much interested your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.